We are so excited to have you join us on Closing Strong. Liz, I have been a very long time fan, and I'm just so excited about this conversation since there is actually a national conversation happening right now about masculinity. And you
Yay!
literally wrote the book that I love and I bought for my father a number of years ago for the
Oh.
love of men. From toxic to a more mindful masculinity, I feel like there's like some manifestation powers in your book and in your book. I'm just really, really, really excited to have this conversation with you about the role masculinity is playing in this presidential election year that is unprecedented for so many reasons, and also just what it means to have a woman at the top of the ticket who's not running because or as or for the reason of being a woman.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I would love to hear kind of how you're experiencing this moment, 9 weeks and counting down
Oh
away
my
from
gosh.
election day.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm such a big fan too. So this is so fun. And yeah, like it's so funny because when I started writing my book, it was actually when Trump announced that he was running. So I was covering the election for Vox and simultaneously writing this book about masculinity. And to me, 2016 was like all about masculinity, but obviously it was also about women and but about gender more broadly. But I think that I was dying for more conversations around just the implications and sort of the politics of masculinity and how Trump was really using masculinity and I think traditional, and sort of, I think, unavailable or unreliable or unattainable masculinity for a lot of men in order to draw them in. And obviously, yeah, Trump now in 2024 is just, double down on that sort of strategy. It's fascinating to see, I think, the Democrats being a little bit smarter, about their messaging, a little bit smarter about how they're definitely messaging, the idea of a first woman of color, becoming president. There's a stark contrast with, I think the strategy when it came to Hillary Clinton, the whole "I'm with her," strategy. I mean, I have so many thoughts, and I'm sure we'll go more into detail. But to me, it's been kind of exciting to see people openly acknowledge the way that masculinity really shapes men's views and choices and voting behavior.
Absolutely. And it's Simon, I really want you to chime in on this as a man.
Our
I want to
token
just
white
talk
man.
about men when we have
Yeah.
one here.
As the token guy, the token white guy here. Yeah.
Represent the entire gender, please, since I was for us. But kind of really specifically, what's been really interesting is the stark contrast of Donald Trump and the masculinity that he projects and tries to sort of, I think, leverage with male audiences in particular, which is where he's really, really focused now, it seems, right, is younger men, where Democrats have had more trouble. And that contrast between the I'm going to say toxic masculinity that he projects and leverages with the kind of masculinity we're seeing out of Governor Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, and also her husband, because I have started to say, as a recently divorced and single woman in my middle aged without children, that I am
Congrats.
looking for my Doug.
Love it.
and
Yeah.
and people get it immediately when I say he's not a Doug or where's my Doug. And it's a very different kind
Yeah.
of male projection, and it's one that I think so overdue to be celebrated and not portrayed or projected as weak. And I would love you, with your brilliant big brain on this, to just kind of expand on what you think that means, and if this is a real turning point, or if it's a blip in the path to smashing the patriarchy.
Yeah, I mean, the Doug test, I think, should be like a new, yeah, like, is he Doug enough for dating? That could be a really fun challenge. But no, I think that Democrats are kind of finally offering a positive vision for masculinity. I think that for a long time, they kind of let Republicans speak directly to men and really tap into their real valid concerns and true like suffering, right? Like it's hard to be a woman in America in 2024 for obvious reasons of, our bodily autonomy is not respected in, a handful, more than a dozen states, and is at risk in the entire country. And there are many issues that are still, that we still haven't sorted out. But it's also hard to be a guy in 2024. If we look at men's ability to provide, right? One of the most important core tenets of masculine identity, that the men certainly tell me is still important to them, is not available for most men in America. Economic prosperity, and I mean, if you again just look at the data, the average man is making less than he was making in 1969, and a lot of the gains when it comes to the economy, when it comes to economic prosperity, have been for a very select few, handful of men who are at the top. But all of those guys are being lumped into the same category as an Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk made more money than any other person on earth during the Trump years. But I don't think that your average working class or middle class, male worker felt any of that, money come into his pockets. And so I think what's happening on the Democratic side is there's a little bit more of an acknowledgement, that we need to sort of communicate, the Tim Walz sort of more populist, more sort of simple messaging about a compassionate but strong kind of masculinity, where you're introduced by a bunch of football players, but you cry with your son, over the beauty of IVF and how important that is as a right, not just for women, but for families, and include men in that conversation. Because, if you look at it, a lot of the policies on the Democratic side actually advantage men and help men in a lot of this crisis in masculinity that we're talking about. That, yeah, men have trouble providing, men have a lot of issues with mental health. When you think about death by suicide, 80% of those deaths are men. But who's cutting the programs for mental health? Who's cutting access to healthcare or making it their top priority to take down affordable healthcare? It's Republicans. But Republicans have a very popular message with men, when it comes to tapping into their feelings and into their concerns. And so I think Democrats need to step up and make sure that the message is as good as the policies for male voters.
Yeah, two things. First of all, this is such an interesting conversation, but I have two thoughts just listening to
Yeah.
you, Liz. One is, I do think that the Biden administration, by prioritizing the infrastructure bill, the IRA, the CHIPS bill, has moved incredible investments into what has traditionally been more male-oriented work, right? Construction work and manufacturing and all the things that are, the acceleration of the energy transition. The idea now that we're starting to eliminate the requirement for 4-year degrees for some jobs, that there's been a sea change in the Democratic Party's thinking, I think, about these issues that you're describing. Well, and the investments we've made are the biggest investments we've made in what is more traditionally kind of working class male work than any party has made in the last 60 years. And so I do think we have a powerful offering to take advantage of what you're describing. The second just reflection I have on listening to you talk today is that, I do think that the abortion issue has opened up a huge well of space for men to engage in these issues of reproductive health and freedom in ways that were probably not easy for us in the past. I think that
Mhm.
the notion that we are now seeing the rights and freedoms stripped away of our sisters, our wives, our daughters, of people that we know, and that their lives have been diminished by this, I think has forced men into this conversation in a way that we probably weren't really that involved in before. And I think this is, in the short term, this has been disastrous for the country and for the women of America. But it's also opened up, I think, space for men to be better partners to the women in their lives and to fight for them and to understand the significance of this. I certainly feel that way. And I go back, if I can just make one last point, the huge kind of moment I had in this whole debate was when JD Vance was on one of those early videos of JD Vance came out, where he said that he believed that women should stay in abusive marriages for the good of
Yeah.
the children. I will tell you, it affected me profoundly about how just batshit crazy this was and how extreme and what an unbelievable threat these guys were to the women of America, that they were promoting women should be getting beaten and sent to the hospital for the good of their kids. In what universe? And so I also have been far more engaged in this debate probably than I was otherwise because of JD Vance coming on to
Hmm.
the scene, who I think has elevated up the threat from where Trump is to something that even feels more pernicious, more Handmaid's Tale like, right,
Hmm.
than we could possibly believe. So I do think these are really important issues that I think are really, I agree with both of you that the Democratic Party and the role of men in the Democratic Party is changing, and I think in a very constructive and positive way.
I totally agree, and I think it's been your path, right, to see the rollback of abortion rights and see what JD Vance is saying about women, to become more involved. I think you're seeing your role as a man, right, in that fight, and even to a certain extent, it's a masculine role, right, to protect women. It's something that I think a lot of men, again, in my interviews with them, tell me that feels good to them. But I think that, yeah, there's been a group of men that have sort of gone that way. And then there's another group of men who have, I think, yeah, where there's been more of a backlash, right? And more of a discomfort with women wanting to reclaim those rights and wanting to be, sort of more empowered to speak out about this in kind of inequality. And I think what's interesting is that your generation actually seems more on board than the younger generation of young men that we're seeing. So there's a huge gender gap when it comes to the upcoming election. It's predicted to be the biggest gender gap in American history, but it's mostly actually being explained by young men really going and sort of supporting the Trump Vance ticket in a way that, like, during Obama, young people kind of you couldn't really tell. There wasn't really a big gender gap. A lot of young people supported Obama, but we're really seeing a difference here where a lot of young men are actually less feminist or less progressive than their fathers or their grandfathers were. So I think there's a real, again, that's why I'm very heartened to see the Democratic Party kind of take that threat seriously and be like, okay, we need an offering for men, right? It has to be an active, positive, story for them to be the hero of. It can't just be, well, don't be them, don't be sexist. What do you be, right? What are you going to be, is probably a better way to put it. I think that's what I've been craving, and certainly seeing some men really model with their behavior. And I think what you're describing, is happening for you.
That's exactly right. That they need to see themselves in this new world where women have more equality and where we are having to fight for rights. And the backlash effect is so strong. And you brought up JD Vance, Simon. I think we have a clip that we want to play from Vance.
To me, what it is sort of a value system to replace the fact that they're all fundamentally atheist or agnostic. They have no real value system. Their only value system is achieve in a very conventional way. And so the idea that somehow they're pursuing racial or gender equity is like the value system that gives their life meaning. Well, of course, they all find that that value system leads to misery, leads to unhappiness. Okay, clearly this value set has made me a miserable person who can't have kids because I already, passed the biological period when it was possible. And I live in a 1,200 square foot apartment in New York and I pay $5,000 a month for it. But I'm really better than these other people. What I'm going to do is project my racial and gender sensitivities on the rest of them.
He's talking about women without children, which is one of his favorite topics, honestly. Every time he opens his mouth, he really likes to degrade and diminish women who don't have children, whether by choice or not. Either way, it's not really okay. He just recently also came out, or there was audio leaked about him disparaging teachers who don't have children, that people who don't have children shouldn't be teachers. We know that he has come out and said that possibly people without children, their vote shouldn't weigh as much as somebody with a child. I understand that he is creating a permission structure for the men that do feel alienated and isolated and do want things to be back the way they were, with traditional gender norms that really just oppressed women financially, economically, professionally, personally, bodily, all of the different ways. But there is a backlash effect, I believe, to Vance and his strong belief system about the role women should play in society. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
There's a new headline every week, and it's sort of hard to keep track, and it's hard to when you hear a new one, you're like, oh, that's an Onion article, right? Like it's the Onion doing a spoof of what JD Vance was saying. Like, so the teacher one I did not hear. I don't know how you insult just like so many people in one sentence. I mean, beyond sort of degrading women for not having the ability or the willingness to do what he can't even do, like men can't even give birth. So to like put down women based on sort of something he can't even do is just beyond me. But I think beyond that, it's like Well, the reason why a lot of women aren't having kids, if you make a list of the policies, that make it harder for people to have kids, it's all a list of Republican policies. And if you make a list of the policies that, tend to sort of encourage or create a better environment for young people to be having kids, it's a list of Democratic policies. It's, access to childcare, affordable childcare, maybe even free childcare. Certain countries do that. And they have high rates of, they have high birth rates. There's so many different, obviously parental leave, right? Like the United States really stands in sharp contrast with the rest of the industrialized world. I mean, being Canadian, it was really what drew me actually to wanting to move here was just kind of it felt in many respects like aspects of American society were like a developing country, that these things are, quite normal in the rest of the world. And here, these are things that we don't, offer parents. And so, of course, it's harder to have kids in a, system that I think a system that JD Vance not only likes, but wants to sort of double down on, right? I think people having kids is great. I don't see any sort of issue with us, believing that we should be ensuring that young people, are given the opportunity to have the kind of family that they want. But yeah, a lot of young people can't have the families that they want. A lot of young women, want kids, but they can't. And it's mostly because of Republicans. And, not even getting into the entire abortion conversation, which, a lot of women, are not having sex with men because in certain states you could go to prison for it, So yeah, everything that, comes out of the mouth of JD Vance is just giving more reasons for women to be afraid to have kids and for women to see it as a liability, not just, sort of from a cultural standpoint, but from, it could be a life, changing decision and you can die, if you don't have the appropriate health care that you need.
So they want to have it all ways, right? Like,
yeah, it's just like, well, then make it easier.
Right. Demand that women have children. That's the only way that they have inherent value
Yeah.
in our society. Give them absolutely no ability to make that easy, affordable, or
Mm-hmm.
sustainable to
Mm-hmm.
do. Chastise them after, take away all of the rights to our
Yeah.
bodily autonomy. It's just,
Yeah.
across
Yeah.
the board. That's
Yeah.
why the gender difference, I think, is so stark. But I hope far more men are quietly supporting the Harris Walls campaign than the polls are showing right now. That's my hope.
Well, that'll be the question, because the Trump campaign is sort of doubling down on young men, and young men are not a very reliable voting demographic, and so far. And
Right.
again, things could change, but I think that'll be the sort of question: is their investment going to pay off? Of going on podcasts that are definitely, I don't know, we're probably not really listening to, but they're definitely popular with young men. Are they just going to tap into their feelings? Or are they actually going to be able to get them to register to vote and actually go and vote? I think that still is remains to be seen and determined.
But Liz, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
on
you
Closing
both.
Strong. Just as a last word, what is something that is top of mind for you, for our listeners, that they could do right now if they want to get involved in the fight in this final sprint?
Well, you can join me at our next Hotties for Harris party. We also are doing all kinds of activations in swing states where we're helping people register to vote, talking to them about particularly abortion rights with this group called Vote for Abortion. And yeah, I usually try and keep everyone abreast of all of the, sort of our next stops. But also, I just encourage, again, deep canvassing obviously is always a topic of conversation sort of every election year. But I really think it's important for people to remember that, they have so much influence and so much, sort of power and more power than they realize to influence the people around them. Your dad or your, aunt is probably more likely to listen to you than to listen to a stranger or even maybe someone on their TV. And so don't underestimate, the power of deep canvassing. And yeah, I've been going to bars. I've been going to, Phillies. We went to a Phillies tailgate where I talked to men about the fact that Project 2025 wants to ban porn. Like, yes, we should talk about abortion. We should talk about all of the big talking points, but there are also so many ways that men are impacted in this election and young men are impacted that you could just talk about at a bar if you're out, and see where that conversation goes.
Thank you so much for joining us,
Liz,
Liz.
thank you so much.